Hello, everybody. And I'm up here in the right-hand corner, left-hand corner. Tracy Stuckrath, the host of the Eating at a Meeting podcast. And I'm excited today it is September is Food Safety Awareness Month. And I'm excited to bring a topic to you about food safety, but from the meeting planner, event planner perspective. We are hiring vendors to cater our food and beverage every single day. And it's really important that we understand food safety practices. And to talk to planners, I put a feeler out and I got these three wonderful ladies to do that. On the top here with me is Andrea Lapp from Baltimore, Maryland. Joan Eisenstodt below her is from the Washington, D.C. area. And then Jayna, actually, I don't know where you live.
I'm in Minnesota.
Minnesota. Yeah. Okay. So they are all seasoned, experienced meeting professionals, and we're here to talk about food safety. So welcome, ladies. So I want to get started. I mean, everybody, I know, Andrea, each of you can just give a 1 or 2 sentence description of what you do as a meeting planner, that would be great. Andrea, let's start with you.
Sure. I work for the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, which is part of Johns Hopkins University. And we convene lots of different types of meetings, from small 30-person gatherings to several hundred people in different international settings. So we have a variety of things going on.
Okay, awesome. Joan?
I'm Joan Eisenstodt, and I'm in fact in Washington, D.C., not the area. I am a woman with white hair, wearing glasses, and a bright blue shirt and blue and gray shawl, for those of you who may not be able to see. I've been in the industry about 50 years. I've had my own company for 42. I consult to organizations on contracts, on RFPs, and on making meetings much safer than they have been. Thanks.
Awesome. Welcome. And Jayna?
I'm a meeting and event planner. Out of Minnesota. I've been doing this for 40 years. I'm like Joan. White hair, glasses from time to time, and I'm wearing blue too. I love food, but I also like good food, and it's really important. That's one of my key things, is that making sure people can eat the food that's served.
That's awesome. Well, okay, so let's talk that one thing, because we're talking about food safety. What does food safety mean to you? And it can come in a variety of ways. So who wants to answer that question first?
This is Joan. I'm going to attempt it, and I think that it's a tough question to answer. The obvious thing would be that nobody gets food poisoning or has a severe allergic reaction. I think it goes beyond that. I think to me, it also means it's accessible, it's appropriate. This month also has Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, where there are certain issues around food, both service and not eating. And I think that when we look at food safety, to me, it's really looking much more broadly at meeting safety and understanding that. And I'm really curious here from Andrea, because I'm, as a great admirer of Hopkins, curious about if you have even greater restrictions around food safety for your meetings.
During COVID, there certainly was university guidelines that had to be followed. After that, it's really up to the individual organization within the larger university. There's a lot of encouragement of not using plastic, not using single-use bottles like of water, and things like that. Sustainability, again, it's within small sections of the university.
Yep. So when you look at safety, is safety specifically, Andrea, in your meetings, what do you consider? Do you have any protocols that you follow?
For me, it's, again, basically what Joan said, making sure everyone can eat and everyone can eat safely, so they don't get foodborne illnesses, and accommodating dietary restrictions and looking out for allergens, making sure all of the food items are labeled with all of the ingredients accurately. During COVID, we didn't have in-person meetings for a long time, but when we went back, it was ensuring that the buffet was not, everybody wasn't touching the serving utensils and things like that. People weren't lining up, and
Understand. And agreed. And it's food safety in COVID. I mean, I did probably 8 seminars the first first month it came out, on what food safety is in COVID. And you can't get, a foodborne illness from COVID, and you can't get COVID from, eating food, but it did play into a wide variety of reasons of how we serve them.
And we didn't know that in the beginning. In the beginning,
Right, exactly.
It was thought to be by touch. And I was traveling during the very early part of COVID before we knew that it was airborne. And it was very much people wearing rubber gloves and looking at how food in particular was served and what we did about that.
Right, exactly. And it's definitely, it was a learning experience for sure on that. Jayna, do you have anything to add on what food safety means to you?
I guess I tend to go on the food safety that it's all inclusive of that it's the ingredients, like you were mentioning, that the ingredients are all listed so that you actually do know what you're putting in your mouth. Sometimes chicken and fish look the same on a buffet table, and you don't know what's in the sauce, and that's where I find it still really interesting that I have to ask every single time that they label the food and put what the ingredients are. Even in today's world, I'm just surprised that that's a special request.
I want to take it a little bit further, and I was thinking, as we've each said something, that COVID was, in a sense, should have been a benchmark for everybody to think differently. And I think that what we've forgotten through that is that as a result of COVID, there have been huge numbers of changes in staffing at hotels. So staff that, let's say that we did a site inspection at some point and we did a contract and we specified whatever we wanted about food safety, cross-contamination issues, which gets to all not having the same serving pieces. And we know that there are now new staff. So I think that if for anybody who has a contract now or is now looking at what a hotel or convention center situation is, it's understanding how are they training, retraining, updating training of their staff around food safety, and it's changed. And what I don't know, and I'm not suggesting we get into it today, is how food safety will be handled with the robotic service of room service, and the safety of that. So that the issue to me of food safety is broad and big and involves people and involves the cooking and the where it's sourced, how it's sourced. I think that people think it's mainly how it's labeled and what is cooked, and it's not just that.
Completely agree. And I want to touch on that too. I mean, in my newsletter yesterday that I sent out, it's understanding who your suppliers are. And an event I did back in April, I think it was June, sometime this year. I was talking to the chef about the appetizers, and I didn't like some of the things that they were serving, the look of them when they were done. He's like, well, I order all of these from an outside caterer. So they don't prep any of their appetizers at all. And I'm like, and so that makes me think, and I said, you have to trust your sources of where you're getting your food from. So, asking our catering companies, who do you get your appetizers from? Or are you making everything in-house or bringing it out? And then how are you trusting or checking on the food safety practices of your vendors? Because they didn't come with labels, and it's really something that we need to be addressing up front.
I think too that it is an issue of trust but verify, and so I think it's a matter of asking, and I do in RFPs, questions about how do they verify with their vendors the safety and other aspects of what they're sourcing. I think that it's one thing to say, do you do this? And they nod yes or say yes. It's another to ensure that, in fact, they're getting it in writing and that we're getting it in writing for the groups that we work with. Agree.
Yep. Andrea or Jayna, do you have anything to add to that?
I think Joan's the expert here for sure.
No, Joan is not an expert. I have had experiences that have taught me that there are things that you do, that you ask, that you have in writing, that will ensure that. And one of the things, Tracy, as you said that about the sourcing of the appetizers, was an experience. I won't explain it. I'll just say this, that I've learned that one of the things to ask and then contract, again, negotiate into a contract, not absolutely, is about amenities. So let's say you've got part of what your concessions are amenities delivered to someone's room. If you know that someone's a diabetic and you know that they shouldn't have chocolate covered strawberries, as an example of something often given, or that they're an alcoholic and you don't want them to have a bottle of wine, then to me, to say that the group will sign off on any amenity delivered to the room, that's another food safety. Or that you'll have, I have a great slide that has a picture of the stuff in my room when I got to a hotel, and it said Joan's nuts. They weren't labeled for me, and they were bags of nuts. And so if I were allergic to nuts, I would want, or I knew someone coming to a meeting where I would want to say, would you please remove those, especially for VIPs that I think we are even more responsible for.
Agree. And that is something that we definitely have to take into consideration, because many a times I've been, handed an amenity as the meeting planner. They know what the dietary needs are in advance, and I get crackers and cheese and wine, and I don't drink wine. At the time I was drinking liquor, but I don't need a bottle of tequila or vodka at the time, whatever it was that I was drinking. But it needs to go into that in depth of that. And Joan, Andrea, go ahead.
I think it's also not good enough just to have it in the contract. You have to follow through on site.
Yeah.
Because the person that you're, working with on site may not have even seen your contract.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Either because they didn't get it or they didn't bother to look. So I think it's honest and open communication. And I find that we have to educate a lot on why this is important. We're not just doing this to be a customer that is high maintenance or has a lot of requirements. There are reasons why we have these dietary requests. Right. It's because someone else either has the allergen or they've made a choice to be a vegetarian or a vegan or something like that. So it's like, it all boils down to communication and education as to why this is important. And ultimately it's a service industry, right? And I think sometimes, especially during COVID, when they were short-staffed, that got lost.
Yep. Well, and I think that issue is still happening. The CSMs, I think, are so understaffed, and they're handling multiple meetings in the same property. And, one CSM I know, she had a 300-page banquet event order, and that takes time putting all of that information in. And those systems aren't easy to navigate.
Right. And a lot of them are new. They've not done this before, and there's no one there to even train them.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. That's what I've run into too, because there has been so much turnover in the industry that they're young people that are coming in, and they don't even know to ask. They're just not even thinking about it. They don't have the wisdom yet or the experience. Right. And so that's I have run into that almost every time.
Mm-hmm. And there's one caterer in Charlotte that I was chatting with last year, and she said she's getting a lot of new admins in jobs that are calling her up and asking for, to place an order, and they don't even know to ask their attendees. So, the four of us know to ask our attendees, but, the young people coming into the meeting planning job don't know how to do that, and aren't doing it on the electronic forms or whatever way they're taking RSVPs.
And I think that it's not just young people. I think that I think that the industry has reverted to what I consider bad habits in the rush to get back to meeting, the euphoria of getting back together. And I think that shortcuts are being taken, and it's very easy, I think, on food to take some shortcuts when it's difficult enough to get the sources for foods that you want. and the shortages and the issues we're dealing with climate that are causing food shortages or food issues, I think that we have to. It is the communication, Andrea. It's like the communication. It's the checking on site. It's the you can't let down when it comes to safety. Period.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Last week I was on a webinar with Giants Foods, the grocery store. Joan and Andrea, you should be familiar with them in Baltimore, DC area. And she went to a conference and she had a friend who was allergic to kale, and the food was published in advance. And so she was like, okay, this is fine. It's a spinach salad. Well, the spinach didn't come in and they served it with kale. And she's like, I can't eat this. And they were like, what are you talking about? And it's just really that following up. And like, when a caterer can't, or a food service person has, their supplier changes it and doesn't let you know, that's a trickle effect that could cause somebody's death. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Or someone, best case scenario, they wouldn't be able to eat, which is not a good case scenario.
Right. Exactly. So, Andrea, why are you so passionate about food safety and accommodating dietary restrictions of your attendees?
Well, as I said before, you bring people together. You want them to be able to eat safely. And I learned early on in my event planning career that if you feed them well, they love your meeting. It really doesn't matter what happens on stage. They will remember the food. So that really stuck with me, that that's a very important part of this job. And I like hearing from our attendees. We have a lot of vegetarian and vegan attendees. I love hearing them say, wow, we've never had so many options at events before. Or thank you for having so many options. I don't go to a meeting and only want to eat a salad. Right. So that to me is like the fun part, but it's also the safety issue.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't want someone to come to your meeting and not be able to eat because they're allergic to kale and there was no spinach that day.
Yeah, exactly. Jayna and Joan, do you have any, what do you like about that? Or why are you so passionate about that?
Well, I'm passionate about contingency planning and risk. I think the same way, Andrea, about if they like the food, everything else can be not so good, but they're happy. It's also, if anything bad happens, period, that's all that people remember. It's what they take away. And our risk as planners, to either our employers, our clients, and certainly to the participants and the vendors, is to ensure safety. And so if anything, I think about what happened with RIMS, risk insurance managers, not around food, it was around an active shooter situation. It's that they had to shut their meeting down 2 days early because of that. If we had an outbreak, anybody at food poisoning at a meeting, then, or whether it's food poisoning, an allergic reaction, whatever it might be, and the meeting had to shut down, or we had to move everybody to a hospital, or had to get care. I think that, and I think some of it comes with experience. The other is listening to what other people are saying. Watch the news, watch to see what's happening around food and understand why this matters. So to me, keeping people safe, period, is the most important thing about a meeting.
I agree. I like that. Jayna?
I agree with what everybody here is saying. I've always, for me, it's event planning or an event or a meeting. It's a three-legged stool. It's the ambience. How does a room feel? What is it? How do you feel when you're in that room? If you're warm or cold, or is it pretty or dark, or all that type of thing. And then your audio visual. If you can't hear what they're saying, or you can't see because they haven't been lit properly, there's that. And then the other part is the food and beverage. And it's the food, everything that you've been saying, but it's also the beverages. I'm sure you've all run into this too. It's like they put lemon or cucumber in all the water now, and people don't always like that. Even just in the alcoholic beverages, a lot of people are going to the cocktails and whatnot. Wine is kind of on the down, but it's to have other options other than Diet Coke for the non-alcohol drinkers, or they'll do some sugary punch type stuff and they go, oh, well, it's non-alcoholic. And it's like, yeah, but it tastes terrible, or it's, so sugary. I find that a lot of, professional bartenders, they're just not, the food and beverage people aren't at the hotels or the properties, just aren't thinking it all the way through from the user, the end person's perspective.
Yeah.
Tracy, I'm curious from you. Are you
Mhm.
finding that, and this is probably a leading question.
Go right
Are you,
ahead.
are you finding that that the people who work in hotels are um, providing information, or are they hearing from people like us in the RFPs more questions about food safety? Are they thinking about it more? People think COVID's over. It's not,
Right.
um, and yet so much of the world has gone on to think it is. Are they hearing more? Are they offering more information without even being asked to planners who may have forgotten or who just don't know?
I think they're not being forthcoming with it. And I think that's the disconnect too. And it goes across all of the things that we do. Like the salesperson doesn't necessarily know, hey, that you can donate food after the fact. I mean, some planner posted today in a Facebook group, hey, did you find anybody that will reclaim the food? And the hotel is like, well, no, we don't want it for liability reasons. Well, no, there's no liability in that, right? And there's new laws about that. So it's educating those CSMs and educating the sales teams on what is capable of doing. But then again, I talked to a salesperson at a large hotel chain, and she's like, yeah, here it is. And then that's the food and beverage is the CSM's responsibility and the banquet team's responsibility. And I think that's a large disconnect, in my opinion, from the hotel sales force of not understanding where they actually play into this whole inclusive safety, sustainability aspect. Because to me, it'll make you more money if you know it and you get it right. But we as planners need to be asking it a lot more, though. Yeah. And going to the non-alcoholic thing, or even the alcoholic thing, years ago when I was an in-house corporate planner, I was producing an event, or I was exhibiting an event, and we had a group of people coming, and somebody locally showed up to the convention, didn't register via me. And the next morning I was walking with the event planner of that convention, and she's like, well, let me tell you a story. And she's like, yeah, and this woman, she had a bunch of margaritas, and she fell into the fountain at the Gaylord, split her head open. And I'm like going, please don't be one of my people. Please don't be one of my people. It was one of my people, but from a local perspective. And I had to, as a responsible meeting planner, report that to my vice president of HR for the whole company. And she ended up losing her job. But to me, it's also, how do we manage the food safety when she's maybe getting a margarita from the 5 different bars, right? And maybe that one bartender, Joan, you don't know that she went to 4, Andrew's bar and then Jayna's bar and then your bars and already had 4. But we also, in the safety perspective, have to be paying attention to those bars. And Jayna, I'm with you. Non-sugary, great alcohol, non-alcoholic options that are not club soda, or water.
Exactly.
I think too, building on that, and industry attorneys have talked in various sessions over the years about the lawsuits that have resulted because of alcohol. I know that here in DC, there was a huge lawsuit. I won't name the hotel, and it was very similar to what you're saying. It was that people came to a corporate event, they had alcohol, they could go to the bar, a bar in the hotel, they could then have alcohol at the reception, they could have alcohol at dinner, and then they had suites afterwards. They had offered guest rooms to people who wanted to stay, even though they were local. And not everybody did. And so someone left the hotel in their car and killed someone with their car, because they'd been over drinking. And so what was interesting, it's horrible. And from our perspective, to me, what was interesting is that, and this is what the attorneys talk about, and certainly when I was sued, not as a result of a food issue, it's that anybody can be sued. Jeff King, who was the attorney for the Convention Industry Council, now the EIC, said, it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong, you can still be sued. And in that case, the 2 admins from the HR department who had arranged all of the events over this holiday party were also part of the suit. And so even though I think that most of us may never be sued or be party to a lawsuit as a result of what we do, I can say that as an expert witness, um, and thankfully, I'm thinking never as a result of something with food, someone can be brought in, and everything that you've done, every communication back to Andrea, what you said, when you said, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to check the bars. I'm going to check the food. I'm going to go in the rooms and check the amenities before the guest gets there. Everything is looked at. And to me, it is both a legal responsibility. It's also a moral responsibility.
Yep. And Andrea, one of you or Jayna had something to comment on that when I was telling that story. Do you remember?
Sadly, been there, done that, seen it too. And and I agree with what Joan is saying, but it's sad that, again, we're always having to police the individuals who are doing the free for all, and and it is hard. And then same thing with, I know I was in a situation too where definitely one of my attendees was overserved, and I think there might have been prescription drugs involved as well. And I went up to the bartender. I'm like, off, and he goes, well, I'm watering them down. And I'm like, and then, so you go find someone else who can, take it away. And alcohol's a problem. I mean, I drink. It's just that, those situations are tough. They're very tough.
Yeah.
One of the things that we've done is to equip if there are multiple bars with radios, so that if somebody's over drinking, whether it's me or the client person can say, can keep an eye, that there's more than one person who's paying attention to who's going to what bars. The difficulty comes in the people who bring their own flasks in, the ones who go to the hotel bar or the venue bar and get alcohol. And then I love when I'm teaching and when I ask the question, about drink tickets, and people believe that drink tickets limit the amount of alcohol, and they don't. I have never had a client not have a roll of tickets that some VIP had to hand out to anybody. And then there's also the issue of people and every state is different about who could be in an event where alcohol is served. So if an alcoholic beverage is left on a table, or I'm appalled at the amount of alcohol served at trade shows. And so alcohol can be a glass can be left anywhere, anyone can pick it up. And no, we can't know everything that's going on. It's a matter of, again, what Andrea said, communicating and making sure that there are a lot of people who are saying this matters and we're going to keep people safe.
Yep. Andrea, you want to say something?
I don't have much to add to that. Our events are very different as far as alcohol. We're grant funded, so it really is lots of rules there.
Yeah.
Even though that being said, we do, really limit the bars. I close them at the strict, usually we have a reception for an hour and a half, and then we go into dinner. Well, when you go into the room for dinner, that bar closes. But that doesn't mean to say that the group doesn't go upstairs to the hotel bar or go out across the street to the bar. And then we have, those sorts of situations. So I think, as Joan said, you can do everything that you think is the right thing to do. And it's still something that you're going to have to manage.
Go ahead. I have a question about alcohol and generally about food safety, and how any of us think that we're dealing. I mean, certainly today in DC, it's 90 whatever, and it feels like 110. And how we're going to deal with the issue of the heat and alcohol and food safety. It is becoming increasingly more difficult. A report I read this morning, think, no, I don't remember which source, it could have been the Washington Post, that showed how the temperature's increasing and that this year has been the hottest on record. How are we going to deal with food and alcohol safety and heat?
That's a really good question. I mean, and with COVID, we were doing a lot of events outside, and now we're getting into the fall and people are wanting to do events outside, but the heat's not going away. I mean, it's 95 degrees today here in North Carolina, and it's supposed to be fall, right? The start of fall. And that's a really good point, because how do you time and temperature control of your food and beverage outside? The alcohol, the heat adds to the alcohol,
Right.
making it easier to get drunk faster.
I think, again, that's communication with your caterer, and finding out, what are your plans? It is supposed to be 95 degrees today, and we're having lunch outside, whether it's tented or shaded or whatever, but the food is still out,
Right.
and how are you keeping it cold? And I don't want you putting it out too soon. I know, they have to get it out because they have to get it out. It has to be ready when you want to eat, but you don't want it out too soon.
Right.
Either,
Well, and
So it's just those
and then-
communications, and also when you're communicating with the salesperson or the person at the catering company taking your order, but when you get on site, you have to do that follow through.
Exactly.
It doesn't mean that, like, our job stops when the food is ordered and you've supposedly worked that out.
Right.
And box lunches to me are a concern, that they are made ahead, they sit around, and then they sit around again. And then the people, the nicety of having them so that those who have to leave a meeting can take them with them to the plane, so we don't have any idea when they're going to be eaten. And having had, this is again, I think we all, when you have a bad experience, you think, how do we protect people? And having had one with box lunches, it's another opportunity to ensure greater safety in terms of timing and service.
Yeah, exactly. There's a comment here from, and I just cut off Joan and Jayna's face to do this. Sorry about that. But Charles put on, the meeting team contracted food poisoning after pre-meeting event team building bonding dinner at a local restaurant. They lost half of the event team and 1/3 of the AV team from that. And so they had to redirect team assignments and revise the event management plan. That's huge, Chaz. I mean, that's, how do you've got to have your backup of who in town can come and support your team. And even me, I ended up getting pneumonia and bronchitis on site. And I thankfully had 2 contractors on site. And I'm texting my boss from the emergency room saying the doctor's saying I can't work. But what's in our back pockets as meeting planners to pull out of our hats to take care of what Chaz experienced.
I think that's why redundancy is important.
Yeah.
For a lot of different scenarios, but then also educating across your team and your backups. Like, if you work on a team of event planners, you may both know about food safety, but what if you have to pull in someone who's not an event planner to cover for someone who got food poisoning or COVID or pneumonia? You have to either shuffle responsibilities over them that don't involve food, or quickly educate them on the things to look for and make sure are happening.
Yeah. On that note, I got a question from somebody else before the show, was like, how much time, and I love this question, how much time does it take in selecting the food and beverage and the magnitude of choices and effort that it creates for one meal? I mean, Andrea, how many meals do you use? I mean, one event I did in April, we had 40 food functions in one 3-day event. So how much time does it take to do that, and explain that process a little bit, and what it, in coordinating all of that? And any of you can answer that, but Andrea, go ahead.
It is an unbelievably long process. I think if you explained it to someone, they wouldn't get it until they do it. They think you just order lunch and we're good, right? How hard is that? How long does it take? Well, when it's a 3-day meeting and there are 3 meals a day and 2 breaks at which we provide food, and there are hundreds of people who have a variety of restrictions, either allergens, diet, vegan, vegetarian, whatever. You have to take all of that into account, and then you have to make sure that they're all covered. with,
Right.
do we have enough? You know, if you're doing I find buffet is easier to accommodate dietary restrictions as long as the food is labeled. But if you're in a scenario where it's a plated dinner, okay, well, I have to either make sure I have enough vegan entrees ordered, or we're all going to eat vegan tonight. You know, those sorts of things. It's a very long process. It's very detailed, and it's not just placing the order. You have to then check the BEO when it comes in and make sure it's right, and you know, all of those things. As far as how long it takes, I honestly couldn't quantify it at this moment. It's a lot.
All right.
I will confess too, if I had to choose the thing I dislike equal to site management, it's food planning. I find it very difficult to try to think about all of the needs and the safety, and to do it from literally the first part of contracting a meeting, because to me these are issues you look at when you send an RFP, when you begin to do the contracting, that you need to know what is available, what might be available, what their options are, what their experience is. And so it's not, I think that people think that the meals are planned closer in, and they may be. The issues that we have to deal with start at the very beginning of the planning process of a meeting, if we're going to do it in a way that's thorough. And so you're right, I couldn't quantify, if my life depended on it, how much time it takes from start to finish.
Yeah. Jayna, do you have anything to add to that?
We can concur with all of that. And just bouncing back a little bit when we were talking about the temperatures, you know, hot or cold, I had a program in Florida, and it was in southern Florida, and it was spring, but it was still hot and sunny. And thankfully there too, that particular hotel, the food and beverage, because we were, you know, again, had the big buffets, we had all the food restrictions that you could possibly think of, and everything is managed. And we were going to do a seafood buffet. You know, one of the sections was going to be seafood. And he right away said, no, we can't have that outside. He goes, we just can't. He goes, it's a fly magnet. And it wasn't so much the heat, it was the bugs, you know, that would just surround and really make it unappealing. So I was like so grateful, because I wouldn't have thought of that. I just don't think I would have. We were just had everything out, but for whatever reason, flies really like seafood in Florida. So we moved that inside. You know, we had signage and things like that, so people could still go in and get their seafood. So it is, you know, going back, you know, like trusting your vendors and them being on the same team. Now, again, he had been at that property forever. You know, he was well seasoned, and he knew those things. And I think all hotel or all venues really do need to have that class or a course, or talk to Joan, have them teach them.
Talk to Tracy.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's one thing that I would like to change in the industry, is that the venues start taking responsibility for educating their people on why this is important, because it's very important.
Yeah.
And let me add, and I want to add to that. I think it's not only it's what you said about teaching them, it's also speaking up, which is what you had that experience, right? Somebody said to you, don't do this. And so it would be so great, and somebody's planning a meal because their CEO said, I love seafood and I want to have an outdoor event, whatever it might be. And that you say this, and that the catering manager, the banquet manager, even the sales manager, the point of contact, says, here are the things I want you to think about. It's the yes and it's the improvisation of using, how do we do this better? How do we think more about what we're going to do? Let me tell you an experience that our facility had. And we're basically talking about in hotel meetings. We have to deal also, a lot of us, with the special events that happen that are catered, where there is or isn't a catering kitchen, or the dine-arounds that we arrange, or even the people who go off site. A former client contacted me about whether or not to spend the money on a plated meal at a hotel, or to give people vouchers to go out to restaurants. And so as we look at we're dealing with a whole lot of changes in how we arrange for food, because now if we send people out, are there even enough restaurants in the area of the meeting for people to go? Do we have any idea? Did we check? And when we all talked before we went on air about, I mentioned the Orlando Sentinel publishes a list of restaurants that are closed as a result of vermin or other health issues. Do we, if we're sending people out, even bother to talk about that? Do the DMOs know what's involved and what are they doing? And so how do we manage all that?
Right. No, that's a really good point. And my friend Mark told me about an event he attended in Toronto, and I don't think they sent everybody off property to eat on their own, but they didn't let any of the restaurants know around that convention center. So he was late getting back into the meeting and missed, 30 minutes of the program because they hadn't shared these to the restaurants that they were going to get inundated with 3,000 people around them.
Right.
I'm like, how do you not do that? But that's coming from somebody that's not seasoned to think about that part. Yeah. Or, even Joan, you mentioned the DMOs saying, hey, to our restaurant members around this convention center, hey, there's no food and beverage being provided at this event. So be ready to feed all these people.
And one, I would be remiss in not doing a shout out to all DMOs. When you publish a list of restaurants in your cities, please make sure you add whether or not they are literally accessible. Can someone get in the restaurant if they use a mobility device? Are there people there who can communicate with someone who's deaf? Are they going to help someone who's blind? Do they have Braille menus? I was tremendously impressed with one of the large Vegas hotels where the restaurants had not only gluten-free menus, okay, it sounds like the menu, if you ate it, was gluten-free, but they had menus that were designed for people who are gluten-free, vegan menus, and they had menus in Braille. And so I thought, or they were willing to the servers were willing to read the menu to the guests. So I think that to me, it comes back to what we've all said. It's communication, period.
Yeah.
Yep.
And doing that, and there's an example of, I'm just going to bring that up with revenue opportunities, right? Because I went to an event or I went to a restaurant in Las Vegas, probably not the same property you did, but like 2 items on their menu were gluten-free out of like 45. I'm like, I'm not going to, and it was like the steak. I'm like, I'm not going to eat a steak for lunch, right? And then I went to another restaurant in Greenville, South Carolina, and it was labeled like all but 2 items on their 35 item menu were gluten-free. And I'm like, my best friend is like, what are you going to eat? You have like this plethora of choices. And I'm like, I'm never going to go back to that restaurant because they had nothing to, and the waiter wasn't willing to like, oh, well, we can do this for you, or we can do that. I'm like, so having what Joan just said is a humongous revenue opportunity. And I'm going to bring the 3 of you to that one restaurant because that's where I can eat. You're exactly. Right. Yeah.
And from the planner side, I'm going to go back to a venue that makes it easy for me to accommodate my attendees.
Right.
If you make it so, I mean, we all said it takes countless hours to put food orders together. But if you make it so we have to go back and forth, because I'm telling you over and over again that I have, 10 gluten-free people and, of that, 3 are vegetarian, and you keep giving me a gluten-free chicken entree, you're not listening to me and you're making my life a lot harder. And ultimately, you're not willing to accommodate my guests. So as a planner, I'm going to then probably choose another property next time.
Right.
And planners need to start from the RFP process to ask questions and not wait until a month out or however long they're planning, and maybe a week out to do their menus. I think it's asking capabilities, it's asking experience, it's asking their best advice and understanding it from the beginning, and make that on your top 10 list of how you decide where you're going to hold a meeting.
Right. I think that's a good point, but a lot of things I run into at the smaller venues are their menus are seasonal, But you can ask for, well, and give me your example of your menu now, even though my event is in 6 to 12 months. It still gives you an idea of what they have,
Yeah,
and
I'm
and go
contracting
to,
to,
like,
I'm
ask to
contracting
put in
10
touch with
years
the
out.
catering. Yeah. Ask to put in touch with the catering person and say, I have a lot of vegans. What can you do?
Right.
Give me some sample menus that we can work with here.
Yeah. Yeah. And sample menus is huge. And I think one of the biggest challenges too is that none of our menus actually have identification on them. So it is, Andrea, we're forced to go back and forth. When you don't label your menu, we have to come back to you multiple times because you're not listening to us and you're not giving us the tools to do our job easier.
Right. Yep.
Okay. So we're at 45 minutes and I just want to ask one final question of all of you. Which question do I want to ask you? What does I know I asked you what safety means to you, but rolling all of the things in that we talked about today, safety, sustainability, and inclusion, what does that look like to you, and how can a venue make it easier for you to do that?
I'll just start, and I guess it's kind of a recap of what we all just said. But I occasionally there's one of the more of a boutique property on their menus. It is completely listed. Their banquet menus, what's gluten-free, pescatarian, all of that. And to your point, it just makes it so much easier. And I think that in itself would be super helpful for all properties to do that, just across the board.
Awesome.
And for me, it's be educated. I think, Jayna, it's what you said. It's understand and learn more and constantly learn and teach it within the property and within the meetings community. Tracy, you do a good job. And we need to go further. I think that on the supplier side, the restaurant side, the hotel side, convention center, food service, whatever it might be, we have to make sure that we are all better educated and constantly looking at the changing demographics of the people who come to meetings, the changing demographics of the country in which we hold the meeting, and that we have to do a better job of being understanding of what we need to do to make sure no one feels left out.
I love that.
And I think to add on to those two great points is, for sustainability, for me, it means making sure that the food is responsibly and as locally sourced as possible. It's seasonal is great, things like that, and just being responsible stewards of the planet.
I agree. Yep. Well, thank you, ladies. I really appreciate you being here. Food safety is a huge component of component of what we do as event planners, and safety in general, like Joan said at the very beginning. Everybody, thank you for being here and listening to us. And if I posted up there on the video, everybody's contact information via LinkedIn. I also put it in the comments. So if you'd like to connect with any of them, please do so. And I appreciate you being here. And thank you for all that you do, ladies.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy, for all you do.
Oh, thank you. And ladies, stay online for me with 1 second after I hit end. But everybody, thank you for being here. I will be here next week talking about food safety again from a different perspective. And somebody just wrote us a comment. Oh, no, that was me. Oh, nope. Somebody wrote, thank you, Joan, Andrea, and Jayna. Appreciate it. And David Skorka. Hi, my friend. I haven't talked to you in forever. Nice to see you. Appreciate you being here. Everybody, until next week, stay safe and eat well.